Καλησπέρα σας. Εκπρόσωποι του Υπουργείου Πολιτισμού και Αθλητισμού, αξιότιμε πρέσβη της Ελβετίας στην Ελλάδα, κύριε Πρόεδρε του Ιδρύματος της Ελβετικής Αρχαιολογικής Σχολής, κυρίες και κύριοι, φίλοι της σχολής, αγαπητοί συνεργάτες και φοιτητές. Θα ήθελα να σας καλωσορίσω στην ετήσια συνέλευση της Ελβετικής Αρχαιολογικής Σχολής στην Ελλάδα. Απόψε είμαι ιδιαίτερα χαρούμενος που βρίσκομαι εδώ, γιατί είναι η πρώτη φορά μετά από 3 χρόνια που μπορούμε επιτέλους να συναντηθούμε πρόσωπο με πρόσωπο. Είναι λοιπόν μεγάλη μου χαρά να σας παρουσιάσω το έργο της σχολής σε αυτή την όμορφη αίθουσα, Cotsen Hall, η οποία μας παραχώρησε την Αμερικάνικη Σχολή Κλασικών Σπουδών στην Αθήνα, με την οποία διατηρώ φιλική, πολύ φιλική και ιδιαίτερη σχέση. Θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω τη Διευθύντρια, την καθηγήτρια Μπόνα Westcoat, καθώς και τον Γενικό Διευθυντή, τον κύριο Παναγιώτη Πάνο, και βέβαια και τον Κωνσταντίνο Τζορτζίνης που είναι στο στούντιο πίσω, και όταν είναι ο Κωνσταντίνος πίσω δεν αγχώνομαι καθόλου, οπότε ευχαριστώ που είσαι εδώ απόψε. Όπως γνωρίζετε, στην Ελβετία μιλάμε πολλές γλώσσες, κυρίως γερμανικά, γαλλικά, ιταλικά. Η αγγλική γλώσσα τα τελευταία 10-15 χρόνια στην Ελβετία έχει γίνει μια lingua franca και οι Ελβετοί αρχαιολόγοι μιλούν φυσικά ελληνικά. Οπότε απόψε θα ακούσετε νομίζω όλες αυτές τις γλώσσες στη σειρά, ξεκινώντας από τα γαλλικά, για ένα σύντομο καλωσόρισμα στις ελβετικές αρχές που είναι παρόν. Mesdames et messieurs les représentants du ministère hellénique de la Culture, monsieur l'ambassadeur de Suisse en Grèce, monsieur le président de l'école suisse d'archéologie en Grèce, mesdames et messieurs les membres du conseil de fondation de l'école suisse, mesdames et messieurs les amis de l'école, chers collaborateurs, stagiaires, étudiantes et étudiants, je vous souhaite la bienvenue à la conférence annuelle de l'école suisse d'archéologie en Grèce. Pour la première fois, en 4 ans, comme je l'ai dit en grec, nous voilà enfin réunis ce soir à Athènes, en présentiel, comme on dit, pour partager ce qui forme vraiment le cœur de nos activités, la recherche archéologique suisse en Grèce. Cette conférence ce soir se déclinera en 4 parties, en anglais, afin de toucher un public élargi. Un premier rapport par le directeur. Ensuite, Madame Tamara Saggini nous livrera un rapport sur les fouilles conduites à Amarynthos en collaboration avec l'Ephorie de B. Ensuite, Monsieur Tobias Krapf, secrétaire scientifique de l'école en Grèce, nous donnera un rapport sur le projet à Aegina en collaboration avec l'Ephorie du Pirée et des îles. La 4e partie, la plus sympathique, mais aussi très importante, sera un apéritif gracieusement offert par notre ambassadeur qui nous permettra d'échanger et de socialiser. Mais avant de débuter, je voudrais vous faire part d'importants changements en 2022 au sein du conseil de fondation de l'école suisse. Monsieur Pascal Couchepin, ancien président de la Confédération helvétique, ainsi que monsieur Pierre Ducret, professeur honoraire et ancien recteur de l'Université de Lausanne, ont quitté respectivement la présidence et la vice-présidence de la fondation de l'école suisse d'archéologie. Je reviendrai plus tard dans mon rapport sur leur action et leur héritage. Monsieur Pascal Couchepin est remplacé par monsieur Pascal Broulis, ancien conseiller d'État et président du Conseil d'État du canton de Vaud. D'origine grecque, par son père, Pascal Broulis est une personnalité bien connue en Suisse comme homme politique, ministre des Finances, grand argentier du canton de Vaud, mais également comme auteur d'ouvrages sur le pouvoir et l'économie, notamment un livre sur l'impôt heureux. Alors, ce titre, en dehors de la Suisse, c'est peut-être difficilement traduisible, voire même compréhensible. In English, I would say the happy tax, or the happy taxpayer in English, which may sound weird for those who have to file to the IRS. And in Greek, it gets probably even weirder. Ο ευχάριστος φόρος, ο φόρος ευτυχίας, ακούγεται λίγο εξωτικό. C'est un grand ami de la Grèce, un passionné d'archéologie et d'histoire grecque, et vous le voyez ici lors d'une visite à Érythrée avec son fils le 1er août 2006. J'invite donc le président de notre conseil de fondation, M. Pascal Broulis, à prononcer quelques mots de bienvenue avant de céder ensuite la parole à notre nouvel ambassadeur de Suisse en Grèce, que je salue tout particulièrement, Monsieur Son Excellence Stéphane Esterman.
Monsieur l'ambassadeur, monsieur le directeur de l'école, madame la membre du conseil de fondation, madame Fachard, bienvenue ici en Grèce. Monsieur et madame Audier, chers étudiants, collaborateurs, stagiaires, amis de l'école suisse ici en Grèce, mesdames, messieurs, comme l'a relevé le directeur, 2020, 2021, 2022, c'était la période où les frontières se sont fermées à l'échelle planétaire, où le monde se parlait par visioconférence, où les voyages étaient quasi proscrits, interdits pour certaines destinations comme l'Australie, comme la Chine. Depuis lors, les frontières se sont réouvertes. Elles subsistent. Une frontière, c'est garantir à l'intérieur d'un pays du calme, de la protection, de la défense. Mais en même temps, il faut qu'on puisse se parler. Voyager, c'est important. Comprendre les autres pour éviter des guerres. Et pas si loin d'ici, il y a des guerres qui se sont déclenchées. On espère un jour retrouver la paix. Donc la vraie vie, c'est de se réunir, c'est de partager des moments de convivialité. Et là aussi, je m'associe aux propos et aux remerciements du directeur auprès de l'ambassadeur pour l'apéritif, puisque partager un moment de convivialité, c'est aussi échanger sur le futur. C'était relevé par M. Fachard. Une petite pensée pour Pascal Couchepin, qui n'a pas compté ses heures pour défendre l'archéologie depuis la Suisse, ensuite ici en Grèce, défendre aussi des valeurs. L'ancien président de la Confédération a initié aussi une loi pour la restitution des œuvres d'art volées ou bien échangées d'une façon discutable. La Suisse est donc aussi à la pointe et c'est grâce à lui que la Suisse peut aussi dialoguer sur ce retour d'œuvres volées. Une pensée aussi à M. Ducret, qui n'est pas présent aujourd'hui, mais qui s'est toujours battu pour que l'archéologie, au sens large, sur le territoire suisse, mais l'archéologie suisse à l'étranger, puisse trouver ses marques. Et grâce à son génie et au montage qu'il a mis en place, l'école suisse d'archéologie en Grèce chapeaute, en quelque sorte, et dialogue avec l'ensemble des chantiers en Grèce, mais aussi dans d'autres pays autour de la planète. Et puis, une pensée particulière à l'ancien directeur et professeur à Lausanne, M. Karl Reber. Pourquoi une pensée particulière? Parce que ce soir, à ce moment même précis, il reçoit une décoration de la Grèce. Il était reconnu comme récipiendaire de l'Ordre du Phénix. C'est pas rien, donc c'est une reconnaissance importante. C'est un témoignage très fort de la Grèce vis-à-vis de la Suisse pour l'engagement que le professeur a manifesté ici en Grèce tout au long de son parcours professionnel et on peut que le féliciter et bon vent à M. Reber. C'était relevé, le professeur Fachard parle d'archéologie, les rapports que nous aurons tout à l'heure, bien en quelque sorte parlent du passé, parlent de ce qui s'est passé en 2022, donc on aura un zoom sur la période de 2022, des magnifiques découvertes, en particulier avec cette statue ici projetée, mais il n'y a pas que ça. On ne peut pas uniquement résumer le travail d'une découverte sur un seul objet. Non, tout le travail scientifique, de recherche, de documentation, de mise en condition est important. Et ça, c'est sous la conduite de M. Fachard et de ses collègues et toutes les personnes ici qui travaillent sur le site grec. Des remerciements à la Confédération qui nous finance les recherches, aux universités suisses, en particulier celle de Lausanne, puisque l'université met à disposition ses locaux, met à disposition des moyens financiers pour financer les professeurs, les assistants, et puis garantir ensuite les fouilles ici en Grèce, et c'est un point qui est important. La coordination au niveau suisse sur l'ensemble des universités est importante, et elle est à saluer, puisque là aussi c'est une coordination fédéraliste. Je rappelle que la Suisse, c'est 26 cantons, que des cantons ont une université, d'autres pas, mais là il y a une ouverture, et nous souhaitons l'école voyager au niveau suisse pour parler aussi d'archéologie et se projeter aussi dans le futur. Qu'est-ce que l'archéologie pour un béotien comme moi? Pas si béotien que ça, mais qu'est-ce que l'archéologie? C'est comprendre le passé pour construire le futur. C'est de comprendre ce qu'a été le passé dans une construction d'une société. Alors tout à l'heure, sous le clin d'œil de parler de la fiscalité, si j'ai écrit plusieurs livres, j'en ai écrit 4, celui de l'impôt heureux a été un best-seller. Pourquoi? Parce que l'impôt est le compagnon indissociable de la démocratie qui a été inventée ici sous l'Acropole et dans d'autres cités grecques. Parce que l'impôt décidé par la cité permet de financer des prestations, permet de garantir la cohésion. Et c'est ce que dit le livre en quelque sorte. Et si l'impôt existe, eh bien il garantit la démocratie implicitement. Et c'est pour ça qu'on peut parler de démocratie en parlant d'impôt. Et à chaque fois qu'on en parle, ça fait sourire, mais gentiment, les gens adhèrent au principe même du paiement de l'impôt qui garantit la paix des peuples. Revenons à l'archéologie, donc ce qu'on investit, la formation, la recherche, les études, le domaine scientifique de publication est un point important. Et ici en Grèce, et là je profite de remercier la Grèce de nous accueillir sur différents sites, de nous mettre à disposition de nos étudiants, de nos chercheurs. C'est un point important sous la conduite de l'école. Voilà, je ne vais pas en dire plus, donc beaucoup de fierté. Peut-être juste quelques mots sur le futur, puisque l'archéologie c'est le passé. Eh bien, l'école, ici en Grèce, a plusieurs projets. Je présume que le directeur reviendra tout à l'heure dans sa conclusion. D'abord, on souhaite se réunir, monsieur l'ambassadeur, sur un lieu commun. Vous qui représentez l'ouverture de la Suisse à l'étranger, nous, on représente un peu l'histoire, on représente aussi la formation, un point important. Et puis avec certaines personnes, la famille Audier en particulier, on pourrait se réunir sur un même lieu. Ensuite, nous aurons à financer sur l'île de Baie l'extension du projet de musée. Là aussi, la Fondation va s'engager avec force et conviction pour trouver des fonds pour garantir cette extension, parce que chaque fois qu'on trouve des objets, il faut les réhabiliter, les nettoyer, les mettre en condition, puis après, il faut les présenter au public. Il faut vulgariser l'archéologie. Alors voilà, c'est nos projets, c'est le futur, on est très fiers de tout ça. Et sans plus attendre, je passe la parole à son Excellence, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. À vous le micro. Merci beaucoup et très belle soirée.
Dear President of the Board of Trustees of the Swiss School of Archaeology in Greece, Mr. Pascal Poulis, dear Ms. Fischer, member of the board, esteemed director of the school, Professor Sylvian Fachard, dear representatives of the Greek authorities, dear guests, dear friends of Greece, ladies and gentlemen. Απόψε την παραμονή της εθνικής εορτής της ελληνικής δημοκρατίας είναι μεγάλη μου τιμή να σας καλωσορίσω εκ μέρους της Πρεσβείας της Ελβετίας στην Ελλάδα στην ετήσια ανοιχτή συνάντηση της Ελβετικής Αρχαιολογικής Σχολής στην Ελλάδα. We are very proud to have the Swiss School of Archaeology in Greece. Archaeology and the school are an inseparable part of the very privileged relations that exist between Switzerland and Greece. As archaeologists, you are living the vibrant Philhellenic tradition of Switzerland, which after 2 centuries continues to be a source of inspiration, motivation, and pride. In this sense, you are our ambassadors. It is the very idea of science diplomacy at its best. The past year, 2022, has been particularly successful as the Swiss school made some truly sensational discoveries on their sites on the island of Evia, in Amarynthos, and off the island of Antikythera in the deep sea. The school is doing amazing work, and it has unparalleled expertise and capacities, in particular also in the area of underwater archaeology. Professor Fachard and his colleagues will certainly elaborate on this, so I'm not going to reveal more here in my speech. Θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω τις ελληνικές αρχές, ιδίως το Υπουργείο Πολιτισμού και Αθλητισμού, για την υποστήριξη και την εμπιστοσύνη τους. Και θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω την Ελβετική Σχολή για τον ενθουσιασμό τους και το θαυμάσιο έργο που επιτελούν. Σας ευχαριστώ. Εύχομαι το 2023 να είναι τόσο επιτυχημένο όσο το 2022.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ, κύριε Πρέσβη. While an archaeological project never comes down to a single artifact, the stone statuette discovered in the temple of Artemis Amarynthos on July 12 embodies the Greco-Swiss excavation of the Artemision and Amarynthos. With her deep and calm glance, the figure gently holds a fawn in her arms. This powerful image, which will undoubtedly find its place in future books on Greek art, was shared by 90,000 readers and 7 million online visitors of the Swiss newspaper Le Temps, which chose it for its front page. The other powerful image of 2022 for us was printed by the New York Times on June 30, and it takes us to the depth of the Aegean Sea of the island of Antikythera. A marble head of a bearded man has emerged to sunlight after 2,000 years, retaining the traits of Heracles, despite the marine deposits covering its face. Two statues from two different periods, with different trajectories, histories, and contexts of discovery, yet both bear witness to the unique cultural wealth and connectivity of the ancient Mediterranean. These exceptional discoveries, which highlight the scope of the projects carried out by the school in 2022, will arouse public interest, I think, for years to come. In Amarynthos, the 2022 excavation campaign brought together a team of 70 people, which is a record for the Swiss School, consisting of archaeologists, students, workers, conservators, micromorphologists, and geomorphologists. The excavation of the late archaic votive deposit, and you'll hear more from Tamara Saggini in a few minutes, is now complete, increasing the number of artifacts to 700. This unique assemblage will lead to a better understanding of the cult practices and the identity of its dedicators. After a decade of excavation, we now enjoy a much clearer view of the sanctuary's eastern part, consisting of a central courtyard framed by several porticos and oikoi. We now have a significant temple facing an altar in the middle of this space. The current excavated area amounts to over 4,000 square meters, but as you can see on this model, with the question marks, we do not have the western limit of the sanctuary. Now, with the help of the Swiss Confederation, the State Secretariat for Education, Research and Innovation, as well as private sponsors, the Swiss School continued an ambitious land acquisition program. The goal is to acquire private plots in order to protect the ancient remains and uncover the western half of the Artemision, including its main entrance on the sacred way, linking Eretria with the shrine. This mission is currently supported by the Swiss government, and we're especially pleased in 2022 to welcome the State Secretary for Education, Research and Innovation, Mrs. Martina Hirayama, and her delegation, composed of Ambassadors Jacques Ducrest and Olaf Kjeldsen, as well as Marc Bruchet, Deputy Head of Mission at the Swiss Embassy, and Professor Martial Pasquier, member of the Board of Trustees. All this, of course, would be simply impossible without the help and active collaboration of the Greek Ministry of Culture. So I take this opportunity to thank the Greek archaeological authorities who have granted the necessary authorizations and with whom we enjoy a fruitful and friendly synerasia. In particular, gratitude goes to the Minister of Culture, Dr. Dina Mendoni, the effort of underwater antiquities, Dr. Eleni Banu, the effort of the Piraeus and the islands of the surrounding Gulf, Dr. Angeliki Simosi, former effort of Euboea and co-director of the Amarynthos excavations, the former effort of the effort of antiquities of Piraeus and islands, Dr. Stella Chrysoulaki, as well as Sofia Michalopoulou, the current director of the effort of antiquities of Evia, Mr. Dimitrios Christodoulou. We also thank Dr. Polixenia Damveleni, head of the Directorate of Antiquities of the Ministry of Culture and Sports, as well as Konstantina Benissi, Sofia Spiropoulou of the Departments of Foreign Schools. Our thanks also go to the archaeologists and collaborators of the Evia effort, in particular Olga Kiriadzi, Fanny Stavroulaki, and Stavroula Parisi. Moreover, the school's activities in Eretria and Amarynthos are conducted in close cooperation with the local authorities and associations, and our gratitude goes to the mayor of Eretria, Mr. Ioannis Dimitropoulos. We have to express our gratitude to the Swiss National Science Foundation the Swiss Federal Department of Economic Affairs, Education and Research, the State Secretary for Education, Research and Innovation, Swiss universities, and the Sandeau Family Philanthropic Foundation. And our thanks also go to my home university, the University of Lausanne, which, as my president said, offers ideal conditions to carry out our activities. In Greece, I would like to thank the Stavros S. Niarchos Foundation for its generosity through a grant supporting 4 SNF Greek scholarships at the Artemision of Amarynthos in restoration, digital technologies, and outreach. Simply put, work and research would be impossible without their help. Last but not least, I would like to express my deep gratitude to the school staff, in particular Thierry Toria and Tobias Krapf, scientific secretaries in Switzerland and Greece, Dr. Daphne Vlandi, administrator, Sylvie Fournier, media communication officer, Kostas Evangeliou, our general manager in Eritrea, and Hari Yanolopoulos and Galatea Konsoulidi, chief conservators at the Eritrea Museum. I would also like to send my warmest thanks to our Board of Trustees, particularly our new member on the board, who is present tonight, Madame Sylvian Fachard, Chair of the Board of Directors of the Banque Cantonale Vaudoise. Governance, as you know, is not an easy matter, and we could simply not conduct our tasks without their active collaborations. In 2022, in the wake of the festivities linked to the bicentenary of the Greek War of Independence, the school supported the Greek translation of the exhibition catalog Geneva in Greece, a friendship at the service of the independence, which celebrates the extraordinary personality of Ioannis Kapodistrias. The Greek translation was presented to the public on December 12 at the Melissa Bookshop in Athens, in the presence of former President of the Greek Republic, Mr. Prokopis Pavlopoulos, and Mrs. Rodi Kratsa, Governor of the periphery of the Ionian Islands, Swiss Ambassador Stéphane Esterman, Pierre Ducret, Director of the Swiss School, and former Director and Honorary President of the Board of the Hart Foundation, as well as the editors Ferdinand Pajor and Béatrice Blandon. And I would like to thank also Annie and Athina Raya for their amazing work on this book. Now, Kapodistrias is, of course, well known in Greece. But most Greeks might ignore that he had played a crucial role in Switzerland. Indeed, in 1813, as a diplomat in the service of the Russian Empire, Kapodistrias received instructions from Tsar Alexander I to save Switzerland, I quote, and promote it as a neutral country in the middle of the great powers. Kapodistrias provided Switzerland with its federal state structure and its current borders. At the Congresses of Vienna and Paris in 1815, Kapodistrias distinguished himself by securing, by decree, the powers' famous recognition of Switzerland's permanent neutrality, which is now under scrutiny and even debate in relation to the war in Ukraine. Switzerland would not be what it is today without Kapodistrias' exceptional negotiating skills, vision, and sense of state. So in many ways, Kapodistrias symbolizes the strong links between our two countries, which continue to be substantial today, the ambassador reminded us, in political cooperation, cultural and scientific diplomacy, heritage management, and archaeology. In 2022, we co-edited with Archeologia και Τέχνες a special issue of the history and mission of the school, which includes a series of papers dedicated to our research and guided tour to Eritrea and its museum. So I would like to thank the Archeologia και Τέχνες team for providing this opportunity to present our activities in Greek, like other schools here in Athens. Now, many articles and field reports were published in 22, and don't worry, I will not tire them with a list. But I will just remind you that our reports, annually published by the journal Antike Kunst, are freely available on our website, as well as the entire Eritrea series, so you can download the monographs. Moreover, we edit an exhaustive bibliographic database that is freely available online, and you will find almost everything that has been published on Euboea. So we invite you really to use this wonderful tool for research. In December, the Swiss School co-organized an international conference dedicated to the archaeology of Athens and Attica in the early Iron Age. Now, this conference was the sequel of the Athens and Attica in Prehistory, published in 2020. The 2022 conference took place in this same great room over 4 days, and it was co-organized by the effort of Antiquities of East Attica, the Swiss School, the University of California at Los Angeles, the American School of Classical Studies, the University of Thessaly, and the Kanellopoulos Museum. And I would like to thank my co-organizers, Dr. Eleni Andrikou, Alexandros Mazarakis-Aignan, John Papadopoulos, and Nikos Papadimitriou. So we look forward to the publication in order to organize the next volume on Athens and Attica in the classical period, but we have time. Personalia now. For a traditional Swiss National Day party on August 1st in Eritrea, we're happy to receive Dr. Eleni Dundulaki, Dr. Angeliki Simosi, and the mayor of Eritrea, Mr. Dimitropoulos. We also received the visit of Carlo Sommaruga, Swiss senator representing the canton of Geneva, here sharing a glass of wine with Professor Denis Knopfler, who is here tonight, former professor at the Collège de France at the University of Neuchâtel. As it was stated in my introduction, Pascal Couchepin, former federal councillor and president of the Swiss Confederation, left his function as president of the Board of Trustees in 2022. So I dug into my archives and found this picture, which goes back some 20 years to 2003. So Pascal Couchepin was then president of Switzerland, and he visited Eritrea during an official state visit. So this is the year when Denis Knopfler and I started the new survey project at Amarynthos in order to locate the Temple of Artemis. And during the ceremony, you can see that Pascal Couchepin was given a fake bust of Artemis by the municipality of Eritrea. And 20 years later, we discovered this incredible statue in the Temple of Artemis. So serendipity, I guess. I would also like to pay tribute to Pierre Ducret, who was director of the Swiss School from 1982 to 2006, and then president and vice president of the Board of Trustees from 2006 to 2022. So I thank him for his extraordinary service, his vision, his leadership, and professionalism. I was lucky to be his student, and you see here Pierre visiting Messini, of course, but also, to the right, the foundations of the East Portico in 2007, which was the first significant discovery of Amarynthos, which allowed us to continue with this project. And Pierre Ducret has been at the heart, really, of the school since 1982, that is 40 years, and he has dedicated his entire career to Greek archaeology, history, culture, and Greece more generally. I move on now to the second part of this presentation with the archaeological report on Antikythera, Aegina, the Dracospitae Navia, and Amarynthos. So I will start with the underwater excavations at the Antikythera shipwreck, which is a collaboration between the Ministry of Culture and the Swiss School of Archaeology under the direction of Dr. Angeliki Simosi and Professor Lorenz Baumer from the University of Geneva. So the project leaders sent a short movie report in French, so get ready for the dive.
Mesdames et messieurs, chers et chers collègues, comme je ne peux pas être avec vous aujourd'hui pour des raisons professionnelles, j'ai préparé une petite vidéo pour vous donner un rapport de nos travaux à Antikythera de la mi-mai à la mi-juin de cette année. Pendant ces travaux, nous étions profit de 3 navires, dont le Typhoon de la fondation Lascaridis et de 2 navires plus petits qui ont permis à l'équipe directement de se rendre sur place. Au lieu de vous donner une démonstration un peu abstraite avec beaucoup d'images, j'ai pensé de vous prendre avec sur une petite plongée. Le site de l'épave se trouve à une profondeur d'environ 50 mètres qu'on peut atteindre à l'aide d'un scooter. Cette profondeur réduit le temps de travail et pour cette raison, il est important de planifier chaque action très précisément. Pour ce faire, nous avons établi déjà l'année passée un modèle 3D qui nous permet d'une part d'avoir une image plus précise du site et d'autre part juste de planifier et réaliser les travaux selon un programme clairement défini. Voilà la région qui nous a intéressés le plus précisément, et comme vous le voyez, elle est couverte de plusieurs rochers. Pour accéder à ce terrain jusqu'à maintenant jamais atteint, nous avons déplacé donc plusieurs de ces rochers à l'aide de coussins hydrauliques, ce qui nous a permis de déplacer des rochers d'un poids jusqu'à 8,5 tonnes. Les rochers, une fois déplacés, les fouilles ont pu commencer donc sur ce terrain vierge. Et en effet, les fouilles se sont montrées très riches. D'autre part, des carottages nous ont permis d'établir pour la première fois une stratigraphie à plusieurs endroits pour mieux comprendre le déroulement du naufrage. Le site est richissimement rempli de petits objets, des éléments de l'équipement du navire et d'autre part de la cargaison, comme par exemple des fragments de marbre, des tuiles ou de la céramique, au plus souvent massivement cassés. Mais aussi l'analyse des incrustations des rochers s'est avérée très important. Dans les incrustations, nous avons découvert nombreux fragments de marbre, de bronze et d'autres objets que nous avons pu récupérer dans la profondeur et analyser par la suite. Une découverte importante était, parmi d'autres, la découverte d'une dent dont nous espérons de recevoir des informations plus précises sur l'équipe du navire. Voici le site en pleine fouille avec le système de pompe hydraulique qui a permis donc de libérer le terrain. Nous avons déjà su qu'il y aura une sculpture qui va nous attendre. Il s'est agi, après le déplacement du rocher qui l'a couverte, en effet d'une plinthe, d'une grande statue, avec taillé en relief sur l'arrière-partie des jambes qui montent vers le haut. La pièce attend encore sa restauration et son analyse précise. Juste à côté, et vous pouvez le voir sur l'écran, nous avons découvert, sous une couche de sable, une tête d'une hauteur de 65 cm qui peut être identifiée assez facilement comme une tête d'Héraclès. Ensemble avec une main, qui y fut trouvée déjà dans les années précédentes, les deux pièces appartiennent vraisemblablement à l'Hercule d'Antikythera exposé au Musée national d'Athènes. Avec ces deux découvertes majeures, donc, il est temps de remonter en surface et j'y tiens de remercier très chaleureusement toute l'équipe des plongeurs, de techniciens et de toute personne qui nous a aidés cette année. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
A rather dry transition off the sea into the island of Euboea now. So the Greek-Swiss research project conducted on the dragon houses, the so-called Dracospita, aims to clarify the chronology and functions of these enigmatic buildings in southern Evia. The project is directed by Professor Karl Reber and Dr. Angeliki Simosi, with the collaboration of Maria Chiviroglu from the National Museum, Chloé Chozot and Jérôme André from the University of Lausanne. In 2022, the investigation continued with the excavation of the Pali Laka complex south of Styra, positioned in the middle of the famous Cipollino quarries. Now, the complex was the subject of important cleaning operations in order to conduct architectural survey, a 3D model, and excavation. Trenches were dug in each building in order to study the stratigraphy and better understand the construction. The fill of the foundation trench yielded pottery from the 3rd century BCE, which pointed a Hellenistic date. Moreover, the excavation unearthed numerous sheep and goat bones and ceramics dated to the end of the Hellenistic period, the Roman, the Byzantine, and modern periods. The archaeological material thus confirms the very long period of use of these structures from the Hellenistic period to the early modern period. Although its proximity to the marble quarries provides an economic and social context for its use during the Roman imperial period, the function of this complex built in the Hellenistic period remains enigmatic. Based on the surrounding environment and the complex positions in the ancient landscape, agro-pastoral activities provide the most convincing setting at this stage. Now, following the last campaign, we await the final publication of this fascinating corpus of ancient structures. I now move to our main core of activities at Amarynthos. So when we launched the new research project at Amarynthos in 2021, we really deemed crucial to include a survey component in order to assert the position of the Artemision within the Eretrian Plain and the wider region. More precisely, the goals of the survey were to understand the evolution of settlement patterns in the long term, for the Bronze Age to the modern period, to analyze the plain's overall connectivity by studying the road network, including the position of the sacred road between Eretria and Amarynthos, and also locate the demes around the sanctuary, especially the deme or kome of Amarynthos, and define the nature of the space surrounding the sanctuary's temenos. Now, the survey combines intensive and extensive methods of field walking, remote sensing using aerial imagery and LiDAR, geophysics, geomorphology, environmental reconstruction, and coring. And the project is co-directed by Angeliki Simosi and myself, with the collaboration of Olga Kiriadze and Chloé Chazot. Now, you can see on this map the area covered in 2021 and 2022. And over 2 seasons, some 6 square kilometers were surveyed using an intensive method. So the main goal of the 2022 campaign were to explore 2 areas of the plain separated by the Sarantapotamos Delta. In the west, the area included between Aios Dimitrios and the modern town of Amarynthos. In the east, the surroundings of the Artemision, stretching between the sanctuary, the village of Karnovathia, and the western slope of the mountain of Mount Servuni. The discovery of several ancient settlements and individual sites, in addition to those found in 2021, allow us to redraw the map of human occupation over the long term and enhance our understanding of the sanctuary's insertion within the ancient landscape. You can see here the position of the Artemision here, the star. So a new settlement was discovered some 1 kilometer northwest of the Artemision, between the limits of the delta and the first slopes of the mountain. Now, this nucleus of habitation, characterized by a concentration of tiles and ceramics, extending over 4 hectares, was mainly occupied during the classical Hellenistic, Roman, and Byzantine periods. Although it's too early to conclude about the site's ancient name, the position of this settlement close to the sanctuary makes it a strong candidate for the classical Demos or Kome village of Amarynthos, which must have stood in the vicinity of the Artemision. Another ancient settlement was located on the hill of Aiosava, situated another 1 kilometer north of the previous site and 2 kilometers away from the sanctuary. The hill and the surrounding fields display very high densities of Laconian and Corinthian tiles, black glazed sherds, carved blocks, and many limestone extraction fronts. The site was occupied in the classical Hellenistic, Roman, and Byzantine periods, and its core extends over some 5 hectares. Survey on the higher slopes of Mount Servuni led to the discovery of additional nucleated settlements above the Byzantine church of Zodochos Pigi, most certainly the ancient deme center of Aglefira. Despite the vegetation and the looting, several buildings made of limestone blocks were recorded and drawn. In addition to a large concentration of black and red glazed tiles, the site has yielded fine and coarse pottery dating from the classical Hellenistic, Roman, and Byzantine periods. And the site is surrounded by numerous field terraces, which are intensively used for olive cultivation. And the discovery of classical farmsteads 1 kilometer south of the settlement would tend to confirm the agricultural character of these terraces, which seem to have been continuously exploited from antiquity to the present day. An extensive type survey was also conducted in parallel on the steep slopes and deep gullies of Mount Cervuni, where intensive survey teams could not be deployed in parallel transects. The survey also investigated the mountain passes, including the site of Vordolaka, known to 19th century travelers and variously interpreted as a small temple or watchtower. The site, which is located on the pass leading to the modern village of Partheni, is known by the local shepherds as Ta Marmara, the marbles. The site, currently covered by vegetation, has been heavily plundered, unfortunately, and partly destroyed. But cleaning operations, followed by a photogrammetric survey and a small excavation, were conducted in 2022. So we're able to identify a rectangular building of 10 meters by 7, oriented southwest-northeast. The foundations, made of limestone blocks, are preserved up to a carefully carved earthen terrea. Slightly set back from the latter's external facing, the first course of the elevation was made of trapezoidal limestone blocks with fine broach work. The quality of the workmanship is really exceptional given the hardness of the local cold limestone, which originates from a quarry which we located some 500 meters north. The discovery of Corinthian tile fragments and a few sherds suggests a construction in the 4th century. Based on the rectangular plan, the presence of an earthen terrea, and the care taken in its construction, we confidently interpret this building not as a tower, but as a small oikos, or a small temple. Situated on a busy pass along the shortest roads between Eretria and Taminai, today Avlonari, and linking the valley of Amarynthos with the heart of the Eretrian territory, the site was clearly in view of the Eretrians from the central districts who walked once a year to Amarynthos during the Artemisia and passed just in front of this building. Therefore, the hypothesis of a sacred oikos or shrine dedicated to Artemis on this mountain pass of the processional route makes sense, I think. And you can see here the pass, the saddle with the road going down. You can see Eretria here and the Artemision down in the plain. Preliminary conclusions for the survey. Despite the damage and limitations due to the urban sprawl of modern Eretria and Amarynthos, especially along the coast, the 2021-2022 survey seasons have already gathered significant information regarding the diachronic evolution of human occupation in the region. The discovery of a dozen ancient nucleated settlements lays the foundation for a new study of the distribution of the classical Hellenistic demes, demoi, as well as the communication network and the region's agricultural exploitation in the long term. Moreover, the survey has been able to specify the position of the Artemision within the ancient landscape. Close to the sea, the sanctuary was dominated by the Paleoclesius hill, which was probably left untilled as a sacred alsos. At the same time, the sanctuary was well connected to the rest of the territory thanks to its position along the main Euboean road linking Chalkis, Eretria, Styra, and Charistos. The survey has therefore largely contributed to our understanding of the shrine's position within the ancient landscape, especially for the late classical and early Hellenistic period. And with the help of professional illustrators, we can suggest the following view, which I'm sharing here for almost the first time, which shows the Artemision in its recreated ancient landscape, with a marshy area west of the sanctuary, which reminds us of Brauron, the Erazinos River, which has the same name as the Brauron River, flowing to the sea, and the rolling fields, which form the backbone of Eretria's rural countryside. And I thank you. And I now give the mic to Dr. Tamara Saggini, who is going to focus on the excavations at the Artemision. Tamara.
Καλησπέρα και από μένα. Είναι μεγάλη μου τιμή να παρουσιάσω τις ανασκαφές απόψε εδώ στο Cotsen Hall. So I will present the excavation conducted in the sanctuary of Artemis at Amarynthos in 2022 as well as the first results of the studies already undertaken with some methodological approaches adopted. Obviously, we are at the beginning of the study phase, so I ask for your understanding as the results are very preliminary. But first, let me thank in my turn the American School for the Philoxenia, the Ephorate of Antiquities of Euboea for a good synergy in the project, as well as the director of the Swiss School, Sylvian Fachard, and the research directors, Samuel Verdun and Thierry Theria, for the trust and the opportunity they give me to work on this beautiful project. And finally, my colleague, Tobias Krapf, with whom we are directing the fieldwork. In fact, the management of this project is quite intense. As the director said, in 2022, we were almost 70 on the excavation field, and you can see a big part of them here, with students from Switzerland, Greece, France, and Germany. Additionally, we are counting now 17 specialists collaborating to the project, and we wish to thank them all very warmly. 3 areas were explored during the 2022 campaign: the prehistoric site, the east sector, and the sector of the temples. I will talk about the sectors 2 and 3 in the Sanctuary of Artemis, while Tobias Krapf will present the results of the prehistoric site on Paleoclesias Hill. Here you can see a plan of the sanctuary with the 2 sectors I'm going to talk about, and I will start with the east sector. The goal of the east sector was to explore the levels under Building 3, dated to the Archaic period and serving as monumental entrance to the sanctuary. Structures spanning on 4 centuries were excavated. A first wall, probably dated to the 12th century, was in use until the 10th century. A second phase, dated to the 9th century, and a third phase to the 8th century, with attesting the construction of an apsidial building. Due to the limited excavated area and the later perturbation, these remains are still difficult to understand. They attest, nevertheless, a dense occupation of this area already before the construction of the Archaic Building 3. Whether these structures already belong to a sacred space linked to the temple and are evidence for the rise of the sanctuary is one of the investigated questions. The sector of the temples was one of the main focuses in the last years. Here you see an image of 2021. And during the last campaign, so last year, we excavated the documented books and extended the exploration toward the east, the west, and the south of the temples. The sector was divided in 6 trenches for documentation purposes, and the goals were to complete our knowledge of the 2 temples identified so far, to continue the excavation of the back room of the temples, and to finish the excavation of the deposit discovered in 2020. The earliest evidence for activity in the temple sector is the stone alignments indicated in blue on the slide and pottery. They go back to the geometric period and were just appearing at the end of the last excavation season. This new phase, now well attested, is one of the most important results of the last campaign and will be one of the main focuses during the forthcoming excavation. The temple number 14 was built in the 7th or early 6th century. It is made of dry stone foundation with mud brick elevation. Right next to the eastern wall, a block probably belonging to the door was brought to light. In the first room, the rectangular structure discovered in 2021 is now fully excavated. Several phases are identifiable, but its function remains uncertain. And to the west, the temple has a second room, now partially excavated. The destruction of the Temple 14 is attested by a thick layer of burnt mud brick used as filling material, as well as pottery, which shows also burnt traces. It can be placed in the 6th century, and the study of the pottery will help to propose a date for its destruction. So here you can see the rectangular structure in the middle. And an interesting discovery of last year for the architecture of the temple is a fragment of lime plaster bearing colors green, red, and blue. It was found close to the northern wall of the temple and could belong to its inner wall plaster. This will be examined by Chariklia Brekulaki this fall, and we thank her already for that. Layers of lime plaster have been found in other places in the temple and around the altar. In some places, it seems to have been used to coat structures, and in other places, it is found horizontally on the ground. We are still discussing the use of the lime plaster within the sector. Moreover, some of the micromorphological samples cutting those layers were collected by the Wiener lab. You can see the number of these samples on the slides. Their composition will be analyzed and compared in order to better understand how it was used and if we are talking about one or several phases. The careful excavation of the sector was also able to reveal an unexpected phase after the destruction of Temple 14. A couple of mud brick walls were built right on the floor without stone foundation. These walls were framing the altar in the northern, eastern, and southern part, and two openings were made on the east side. To the west, they were less well preserved, partially due to a big Byzantine pit, and due to the construction of the modern house that you see on the slide. The way these mud brick walls were built showed that this setup was certainly temporary, allowing the activity around the altar to continue until the construction of the next temple. It is within this frame that the offering deposit discovered in 2020 was placed. Evidence for that are some objects leaning against one of the mud brick walls, as shown on the right image. Around 700 objects are part of this deposit, of which the majority dates to the last quarter of the 6th century. However, the preliminary study shows already that the deposit contains also earlier objects. These could have been possibly already in the temple when it was destroyed and then were replaced in this deposit. The variety of the finds are reflecting the different spheres of activity of Artemis, Amarynthia, protection of fertility and birth, rite of passage of young women and boys, or other cult practices. The exploration of the second room to the west was not less spectacular. Under an impressive tile layer, many objects such as bronze shields, knives, double axes, or rings with scarab seal were discovered. While these objects are rather hard to date by themselves, the pottery found together indicates that they are not part of the same assemblage as the late archaic deposit. This is going to be investigated further during this campaign. And finally, a new temple is built together with a new altar that is not visible here on the slide. The foundations of more than 30 meters long on 10 meters wide were made of beach rock slabs. They rest partially on the previous temple and partially on an imposing bed formed by schist and limestone boulders. Some elements suggest that the elevation was partly made of poros. The architecture of the temples will be studied by Jérôme André of the University of Lausanne and the roof structure by Philippe Saperstein. And as you can see, we counted and kept religiously a lot of tiles, not only nice antefixes, and so he has a lot of work to do. The excavation team should be thanked again also for an intense post-excavation week, during which drawing, measuring, photographing, and discussing took place. And here you can see some impression of this week. As you can imagine, the pottery is abundant and quite exceptional. Christina Pagonin and Josephine Yo were kept busy for a lot of weeks until everything was washed, numbered, and stored. In spring, we will start the study of the pottery found in the temple with my colleague Samuel Verdon. Because of the exceptional context that you were excavating, and you remember probably also the slide of last year, An important amount of time was dedicated to the sieving of the sediment, and this was managed by Maria Rumegliotti. 6,283 liters were sieved and 934 liters went through flotation. Alexia Eliadou did the flotation and sorting on site, and she has now begun the sorting and the study at the Winner Lab under the supervision of Evi Margaritis. For the third season in the temple, we collaborated with the Winner Lab. Takis Karkanas, Dimitris Roussos, and Mirseni Gouma collected new micromorphological samples, and here you can see some of the images of our intensive discussions on site. We thank them warmly and are looking forward to see the results. Now, let me go back to the finds for the last part of this talk. After 3 years of excavation, the archaic offering deposit is now most certainly fully excavated. Before being able to even to study them, a lot of objects require restoration. The evaluation of the time needed to restore all the finds found in the temple reaches up to 17 years. And that is why our team was expanded, and now 7 persons are working at the restoration lab. Evidently, it will not be possible to restore everything, so we are forced to set priorities. Some of the challenges were the conservation on site of some objects prior extraction, or the presence of wood and textile remains. For advice on the right procedures on this material, we should thank Cristina Margaritis and Maria Petru, specialist restorer who came to examine the objects at the Eritrea Museum. You can see here some of the example on the right. So we have also a piece of bronze shield with wood inside preserved, a wooden handle of a knife, and a small part of textile, but I will come back to this later. Additionally, at the beginning of March, more than 50 pieces have been scanned either by X-rays or computed tomography. On the left, you see the whole team at the General Hospital of Chalcis, and I wish to thank them especially, as well as Stavroula Parisi and Fotini Popoli of the F48 for their help. On the slide, you get to see a preview of the results with 2 examples, bronze vases on the top and a fragment of shield at the bottom. The scans allow us to see imbricated objects, identify different layers of metal, or understand simply the state of preservation of the metal finds. These images are still getting processed, but if you want some details, feel free to ask our restorer, who are almost all here tonight. In parallel to the restoration, different studies have started, and I will now show you some of the preliminary results. The study of the archaeological remains is undertaken by Angelos Kotsinas. He counted 3,914 fragments so far. 80% are from long bones, the femur part, and 95% are heavily burnt or calcinated. Sometimes the pieces are so small that he cannot even identify the species, but as you see in the figure, the interesting part is also that we have 1% of deer bones. The textile is studied by Bela Dimova, and she counted 200 fragments so far, so you can imagine the restoration team having panic attacks on those fragments, really. The textile is whether carbonized, either carbonized or mineralized, and you can see an example, a photo to show an example. She could identify traces of purple and different techniques like plain weave, weft face tabby, and tapestry with spiced and spun yarn. So really she could identify test different techniques. Moreover, some objects show multiple layers of fabric as an evidence of the objects having been wrapped in the fabric. One of the difficulties is to map the fabric remains in order to understand where and how they were placed. Combining data from the excavation and microscope examination seems to indicate that the fabric remains were essentially found close to and on metal objects, and here you can see 3 examples of it. This study is still ongoing, but I am sure that Bella will be happy to answer your question during the reception at the end. Pauline Maillard started the study of the terracotta figurines found in the temple this winter. Around 100 complete figurines belong to the offering deposit, and among them 50 are plank figurines. She could already identify potential local products as well as Attic and Eastern Greek imports. The polychromy preservation is stunning, and we want to investigate that topic, if possible, in collaboration with Chariklia Brekulaki. As you saw many times now, last summer, a quite unique find was discovered within the archaic offering deposit. You can see here on the left image, during the excavation, the figurine laying against the eastern wall of the temple. It is a limestone statuette of 31 centimeters high, holding a phone in its hands. It belongs to the so-called Cypro-Ionian sculpture style, well attested in the archaic Aegean, but has no exact parallel so far. It is dated to the first half of the 6th century, while the deposit in which it was placed dates to the last quarter of the 6th century. So it clearly belongs to the group of objects which were probably already in the temple at the moment of its destruction. My colleague Pauline Maillard and I are currently preparing an article about this statuette. Together with the figurines, the clay vases are the most numerous objects found in the temple. Among the vases, there were also 11 bronze fialae and 2 other bronze vases of which we cannot identify the shape so far. Here you see only a few examples of the about 160 complete vases of the archaic offering deposit, only of the archaic offering deposit. You can also see on the slide a figure showing the repartition of the different shapes. The 2 first dominant shapes are Hydriskoi and Kotilai, 2 of the favorite local shapes. And then Lekitoi and Hydriai, which are almost all of them black-figured. The vases of those 2 shapes show many similarities and may probably could come from the same local workshop. Indeed, a close examination of the clay reveals that most of the vases are certainly products of 1 or more local workshops that are still to be identified. This is why 49 vases from different shapes and techniques have been selected for clay analysis. And on the slide you can see some image of the selection process with Vangelio Kyriadzi and Noemi Müller of the Fitch Lab of the BSA. If these new analyses are allowed, it will be the first time that Euboean black figure found in context will be analyzed, and the number of samples is big enough to draw many different conclusions. Moreover, this new analysis will be anchored in the results of an ongoing project directed by Sylvie Müller and Vangelio Kyriadzi that aim to identify diachronically local resources and production of pottery in Eritrea. And finally, to understand the use of these vases in the sanctuary, we are conducting, in collaboration with Maria Rumbu and the Characopio Lab, organic microresidue analysis. The first batch has already been sampled, but we are waiting for the results, so I cannot give you more information about that tonight. And depending on these results, we are going to analyze another batch. As you can imagine, this project requires a lot of administration, and I must say that we are very lucky to have in our team the exceptional Daphne Vlanti, whom I thank very much for all the help. Tonight, apart from the result of the last excavation, I wanted also to show you some of the preliminary results and the progression of this project, which requires an interdisciplinarity collaboration and a lot of teamwork. Thank you for your attention, and I'm now giving the floor to Tobias Krapf.
Now the third part of our excavation project at Amarynthos, our Greek Swiss excavation project focuses on the hill that is overlooking the plain and the sanctuary, and on the 2 millennia that precede the existence of the sanctuary in the coastal plain. In fact, there existed for about 2,000 years a Bronze Age settlement on Paleoclesias Hill in a very different topography from what we will see later in the first millennium BC, when the sanctuary has been created there. In fact, Paleoclesias Hill was still a peninsula, and a bay and later lagoon offered safe anchorage space for Bronze Age ships traveling from the Cyclades and along the Euboean Gulf. We explored these sites since the last 3 years now, and we try still to buy private plots, as Sylvian Fachard mentioned earlier, in order to protect and to explore the site. Last year we were able to buy another 4 plots on the western slopes of the hill that will allow to extend our excavation site, now public property of the Greek Ministry of Culture, to 13,000 square meters, protecting the site and enabling its archaeological exploration. Zooming in, you see the different trenches that we opened in the last 3 years on the slopes of the hill, while the summit plateau itself had already been explored in the 70s and 80s by the Greek Antiquities Service, by Liana Parlama and Efisapuna Sakelaraki, and they brought to light especially structures from the early but also from the Middle Bronze Age. We opened in the last years another 6 trenches on the slopes, and I'd like to thank especially Daniela Greger, with whom I coordinate works in these trenches, as well as the trench supervisors that helped us last year. Now, in 2021, at the northwestern slope, we found a complete a complex sequence of early Helladic structures, including a well of early Helladic I date with a closed deposit that will help us to understand this still not very much explored phase in Europe, in Euboea. We found as well a massive, probably retaining wall of early Helladic II date that follows the slope, and that we try now to explore, or that was at least the aim, if it continues around the hill and might form even kind of a fortification. In 2022, this, however, was not possible because we found substantial medieval remains that cover this area of the slope, as you can see, with at least 3 or 4 different spaces, wells, pits and walls, as well as a channel. And only in the last days we reached the early Bronze Age, immediately below the Byzantine layers. So we'll certainly continue to explore this area in this summer. The same situation was encountered on one of the new plots on top of the slope, where you again can see a very complex sequence of medieval structures and walls built directly on the early to early Middle Helladic layers. And the same situation once more in Trench 35 that we explored the last 2 years, where we have a Byzantine wall that cuts even into the Bronze Age layers. In front of it, we had a rectangular but heavily destroyed structure that could have formed a Middle Helladic schist grave, as well as a destruction layer of early Helladic period a bit further down, and we will continue the exploration of this trial trench, which brought to light some more interesting finds of the early Bronze Age, like fragment of a Cycladic frying pan that attests to the relations that were already known for the Euboean sites with the Cyclades to the south. Now, the situation that we encounter on the slopes is quite homogeneous in all the trenches, as we have substantial Byzantine remains covering actually the entire hill as well as its slopes. And underneath, immediately, we reach the early Bronze Age, which, of course, raises a series of questions. Our aim was, and actually the same situation was in the north, in the east, where we have, again, immediately early Bronze Age finds in Parlamas Trench. What we were looking for was the Mycenaean phase that is preceding the sanctuary, and we found it only in one of the trenches and only in the shape of a dump of material that has been placed here, probably secondary, heavily broken fragments, most of them of late Helladic 3B2 date, probably, but it's a very fragmentary material. While we have a lot of Mycenaean material that has been washed down the slopes, and we find it in the eastern part of the sanctuary towards the east portico, and it's in fact the phase that is attested in the Linear B tablets of Thebes with a place name mentioned, Amaruto. So we have to conclude that this phase has been heavily eroded away during the 2 millennia between the Bronze Age and the Byzantine reoccupation of the hill. In fact, we have almost no finds from antiquity during the period when the sanctuary existed on the coastal plain on the hill. And the few finds, like a fragment of a stele found last summer, can as well have been brought there in secondary use as construction material upslope. It's only in the medieval period, when the hill, after the existence of the sanctuary ceased, attracts again attention. And it's of this settlement now, which is the last chapter of the history of the site of Amarynthos, that we excavated by chance, but now it attracts our interest, are both domestic remains, but also a dozen of graves that we excavated in 2021, with thousands of sherds that have been washed down the slopes into the area of the sanctuary, some of them with a particular interest, like a small table amphora with an incised Venetian galley, showing that even Venetian sailors stopped at this small coastal site. And it is this 5,000 years of story of the site of Amarynthos that we don't want to tell only to the archaeological public, like here in our annual meetings, but that we focus on in our different outreach programs, both in schools in Switzerland, but as well in Euboea and in Greece. With programs like open excavation days and guided tours, school visits for children from Switzerland, but also from the local schools at Eritrea. And we were even invited in the Municipal Council of Eritrea, and we thank the mayor of Eritrea and the vice mayor for their invitation. And our favorite activity, excavation with the children on the beach of Amarynthos, finally possible again after 2 years of pandemic. We had 70 young scholars that got their first archaeology diploma and that will probably in the future join us on the site. And the photo from 1 month ago that shows how happy we are that this site is so much anchored in the local town, with a parade on the Carnival of Amarynthos, Artemis Amarisia appearing again on a char. And a photo, this is though, as you see from the pandemic, but it shows the local stadium in Amarynthos, and this was a great initiative of the Cultural Association of Amarynthos to paint different images from our excavation on the walls of the stadium that you see entering the village. We were working last summer during the excavation on a documentary movie that should be out after this year's campaign in autumn, and we will certainly be happy to present it as soon as it has been shown in the Swiss TV. And we will have a new experience this summer when we try to have an art residency program on the site involving 10 artists from Switzerland and from Greece on the site, following excavation and getting inspiration from our work, but also from the finds, especially those that Tamara just showed, and that will hopefully lead to an exhibition that can take place both in Greece and in Switzerland. And second, from Euboea to Aegina, from Artemis to Zeus, from steer and dragon houses to Aeginete and Dracospito, I have the pleasure to present you as well our joint Greek-Swiss project in the name of all our project team, and especially Stella Hirshulaki, with whom I co-direct this new 5-year project on the Hellenian Oros on top of Aegina. While the German Archaeological Institute investigated some 20 years ago the monumental archaic and Hellenistic structures of the sanctuary of Zeus Hellenius, identified thanks to inscriptions on the northern slopes, our project takes us right to the top of the mountain. After all, we like a lot, of course, Greek islands, Euboea, Antikythera, Aegina, but as Swiss archaeologists, it takes us back to mountaintops. It is an incredible spot with a 360 view shed. It's the highest spot of the island, and here you have the view towards Moni and Angistri Islands and Peloponnese. Located in the today almost uninhabited southern part of the island, it is actually covered with a massive field of ruins. And in 2021, we could open a series of first trial trenches in which we tried to date a first selection of structures. The site, in fact, has already been excavated heavily in the early 20th century, but there is only scarce documentation that is left from these first explorations, including this topographical sketch that shows, though, a densely built and walled settlement on top of this quite remote mountain. In 2022, now our works focused especially on the topographic documentation, stratigraphic drawings in the trenches excavated in the previous year, as well as in extensive exploration of the territory around the site in order to lay out the survey that should follow in the coming years, as well as a major effort on restoring the different finds from the previous years. We had excavated in 2021 those trenches here on both sides of the church, mainly trench 3 that is on the southern side at the highest available spot, at least, of the summit, in one of the buildings, trench 6, and in a different situation on the northern slopes where we have substantial Mycenaean remains, an area that has not yet been explored in the earlier excavation, as it turns out. In trench 1, we found now firm proof of Middle Helladic frequentation of the site that has been discussed in earlier publications. Here you see typical Aeginitan matte-painted pottery as well as other materials. In trench 3, after a new cleaning, we can now identify clearly a kiln in the stratigraphy, which shows that this was really a functioning settlement that had even its workshops on top of this mountain. And both in this trench as well as in trench 6, we have a lot of mixed materials from the historic periods, geometric to Roman especially, and much of the material is coming from the backfill of the earlier excavation, but still leads to important new finds. On the northern side, we can identify a retaining wall that was so far unknown, and just above it, in the cracks of the rocks, there were offerings placed mainly in bronze and other metals, placed from the Mycenaean period up to modern days. We even found keys of a house and the photos that someone deposited there. And in the lowest layer we excavated, we could retrieve from the pottery fragments a complete Group E, LH3B Mycenaean deep bowl. And the entire area in the upper slope was covered with tiny, now they don't look tiny on this huge screen, but with really tiny, thousands of tiny burnt animal bone fragments. And the study of these by our archaeozoologist, Angelos Goutsinas, who just has initiated to work on this difficult material, seems to prove that this must be of ritual use, coming just from above the area of the trench here, where we have actually ancient foundations just under the church on top of them. And it is in front of this retaining wall that we had excavated a destruction deposit with several complete pots, and that we have now restored. They're both drinking and cooking vessels as a carinated kylix, and the tripods, deep bowls with the running spirals and amphoriscos, but also a round-sided alabastron with tri-curved arches. As well as storage pottery, typical Aeginitan cooking shapes that are so well known from many sites around the Aegean that have been exported from Aegina, but have been used apparently on top of the mountain as well. Material that could probably still be from the Palatial period, while in the deposit, all these fallen blocks of the destruction layer, we also have late Helladic 3C material, like a carinated tripod, again of Aeginitan fabric. We profited from the drawing season as well for taking samples for different analyses, like phytolith analysis that will be carried out here in the Wiener lab. But in order to understand this deposit with its very various shapes and uses, we certainly have to extend the trench in the coming years, as some of the fragments are even now still stuck in the stratigraphy. So it's very promising for the campaigns to come. In the same time, we were also working on the preparation of the survey of the area, an area that today might look very remote and inaccessible. And our aim is to understand how this site on a peak 530 meters high could work in this volcanic landscape. And we tried to do a first intensive survey in a landscape that's definitely not promising for it. We tried it, although this vegetation covered all these fallen rocks on the terraces, and there is actually a lot of ceramic from many different periods and lithic tools to be recovered. So we will try in the next 3 years to do that systematically, at least where there are terrace walls. And there are terrace walls on many parts of the area. An area that today, as said, is almost abandoned, but which was heavily used up to the 1950s or 60s. Here a view from the today abandoned village of Kanakides towards Mount Oros. An area that is also scattered with several different monuments of many different periods, even a dragon house, now that the Euboeans come back to Aegina, that we were able to document this campaign for architectural study with a view behind Moni Island and Angistri. As a building that is actually over the years, became part of a wider constructed landscape, and it's not too far from another abandoned village. And you see threshing floors, there is a small cistern, and again, an area that has been terraced. And we'd like to understand also this early modern land use in order to understand how this could have worked with a settlement on top of the mountain, maybe already in the late Helladic 3C period, but certainly also during several phases of the historic ancient periods. The dragon house, as it's called, consists of 2 rooms, as you can see, that communicate between them, covered with huge stone slabs that also led to this naming of the structure in comparison, obviously, to those in Euboea that we have seen before. Not too far, and at different parts of the area, we find cisterns that certainly played a crucial role in the land use of this area. Some of them go back to antiquity, as those near the sanctuary of Zeus, in which have actually been found several ancient objects, including bronze hydria with the inscription dedicated to Zeus. And they're still being used, including other blocks that and some of them could well go back to antiquity as well. And we're trying now to map different other structures, farms that are scattered around the entire landscape. The southern part is of great interest and has already been explored thoroughly by Sofia Michalopoulou of the Ephorate of Antiquities of Piraeus and Islands, who is also a member of our project. And I'd just like to mention around Ancient Tower, that is at the very southern spot of Aegina, a very strategic part, of course, that has been fortified in the 20th century again. And an area in which Irina Polinskaya has mapped in a Hesperi article a whole series of Horos inscriptions that you can still find in the landscape carved on rocks. And I take this as a Horos for our today's annual meeting presentation, and I will stop here with Aegina and warmly thank everyone who contributed to our 2022 works on the island. Thank you so much.
Okay, the goal was to stay under 1 hour and 20 minutes. I think we just managed this. So thank you to everyone for coming. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Σας καλέσουμε τώρα για ένα κρασί κάτω και ένα aperitif, που είναι μια προσφορά από την Ελβετική Πρεσβεία. One thing before I stop, I've been told that we're not allowed to drink red wine on the beautiful marbles of the courtyard. So there is red wine for those of you who want red wine, but you have to take your glass and move further lower in the garden so we don't do any damage on the marble. Thank you.